What's up, boxing fans? I'm Joker Boxing. I got Boxing Gossip with me. What's up, man?
Hey guys, I'm good, thanks. Good to speak to you, Joker Boxing. How you doing?
I'm doing great, man. Good to speak to you as well, as always. Let's go ahead and get into this fight, man. We know what time it is. It's fight week. Everyone is talking about this fight, especially in the UK, and that is Scott Quigg versus Carl Frampton. What are your thoughts on this fight, and how big of a fight is this? So, can you explain that to the US audience who's probably listening into this, as well as the UK audience?
Yeah, this is a real big fight in the UK. I mean, what I'd say on that is certain fighters are made for one another. You get certain boxing rivalries, especially in the UK, I think, where the hype and the animosity between the two guys builds and builds and builds. I mean, we had Carl Frotz versus George Groves. There's been a lot of talk about Amir Khan versus Kell Brook. I wouldn't say this fight is necessarily as big as either one of those two, but it's on that sort of level. And Frampton Quigg is a fight that has been discussed for a very long time in the UK. Well before these guys were world champions, they were being talked about as a potential matchup. And a lot of questions are going to be answered this weekend. It's the one I'm really looking forward to.
I agree 100%. Especially after seeing these two face off and all the banter going back and forth. You got to see a lot of the two different personalities, a lot of things that we didn't really get to see before. Carl Frampton. I think we probably still think the same as we thought of him, right? Like kind of a silent killer.
Yeah.
But, to see Scott Quigg so vocal, I don't think everyone really expected that. But you could see that it really bothers Scott Quigg that the majority of the boxing public, kind of always looked at Carl Frampton like, this is the guy, he's the talented one. Quigg is just some guy who just got heart. You could see that's kind of rubbed off on Quigg the wrong way. And it just seems that Scott Quigg is out to have something to prove in this fight, which is, like you said, this is what makes this so difficult. Because if Carl Frampton is of the air right now that, Scott Quigg's not on my level, he's not really worth my time, I'm going to come in here and this is going to be easy work. Well, then, and Scott Quigg's coming in so hungry, maybe that sort of levels the playing field and just makes this such a 50-50 fight. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a fight where, for me, the build-up is actually relevant because I could see this fight playing out in a number of different ways. And how it plays out is going to be key to who wins. For me, if this fight is a long-distance boxing match, Carl Frampton most likely wins. If this fight becomes a scrap and a brawl in the middle of the ring, I think Scott Quigg most likely wins. So, for me, it's it's really important that the guys keep their cool and are able to box to their game plans and don't get into too much of a scrap and fight in a sort of sensible technical fashion. Because I think if Carl Frampton gives up his advantages and gets involved in a brawl, it could end badly for him. So yeah, I think that the hype is real, and I just think that it does have the potential to affect the result of this fight. So it's relevant for me.
Absolutely, man. I agree with you 100%. And another thing, too, I think what really has people scratching their heads and really taking their time with their predictions is that they're looking at the fact of both of these guys' last fights, right?
Yeah.
We saw Carl Frampton struggle a little bit in his last fight. And on the contrary, we saw Scott Quigg blow through Kiko Martinez probably easier than anyone who's fought Kiko Martinez has, right? He came out the first round, he kind of feeled him out. Sure, he ate some jabs a little bit, but for the most part, he was just kind of feeling out Kiko. And man, in the second round, exploded. And that's the thing that I'm getting from most people. I'm hearing that if someone gets knocked out in this fight, they're expecting it to be Carl Frampton more than they're expecting it to be Quigg. They're thinking that Quigg can come on early and maybe hurt Carl Frampton and change the complexion of the fight. Maybe get Carl Frampton out of his game plan.
Absolutely. Momentum is so key in boxing, and it was very funny. Scott Quigg had his career best performance exactly the same time Carl Frampton had his career worst performance, and Frampton looked very vulnerable that night. Quigg looked like he'd improved a lot, and that really has changed a lot of people's opinions. The other thing I'd say, and this may be especially relevant to some of the American listeners if they haven't seen a lot of Scott Quigg on the way up, but Scott Quigg really is a world-class body puncher. I mean, don't sleep on Scott Quigg's body punching and his power to the body. And I detect a slight air of vulnerability about Carl Frampton to the body. The rumours in the UK, and these are only rumours, but the rumours are that Carl Frampton is very, very tight at the weight, and it's been a real struggle for him to get down to the weight. And, with Scott Quigg's body punching capability, that's something that could play a factor in this fight, definitely.
That's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up, because I agree with the power of Scott Quigg, with his relentless ability to come forward. He is going to test that body and even the chin of Carl Frampton, and both of which people are kind of speculating at this point. Because there's one thing you got to say about Scott Quigg: the guy can punch, regardless of what you think about him, and he loves to come forward. Now, let's go ahead and get into this breakdown. In my opinion, I really got to give the edge to Carl Frampton, and here's the reason why. I think Carl Frampton has more ways to win this fight than Scott Quigg does. Now, I agree with you that this is a very close fight. Anything could happen. And Carl Frampton is going to have to, especially from rounds 1 to maybe rounds 4, be extremely careful and not get drawn out into a war with Scott Quigg. I know as fans we would love it, but I'm just saying, if you're Team Frampton, I don't know if that's what you want, because in those early rounds, as Scott Quigg has proven, he's going to be extremely strong, and he's going to be out to, from the offset of this fight, really stick it to Carl Frampton and let Carl Frampton know mentally he's in a fight. So I think that Carl Frampton is going to have to be ready for that. He's going to want to really pick his spots and really try to make Scott Quigg box. Again, I think Frampton does have more ways to win, because he also does have power, as we've seen throughout his career. And so he can mix it up with Scott Quigg, land clean shots, and then also get out of range to where Scott Quigg may not be able to, impact him as much. Because Scott Quigg, even though he's the longer fighter, he's more of an inside fighter, right? Scott Quigg's not really a guy who doesn't really seem that comfortable on the outside. So that's kind of what I'm looking at. I'm looking at Carl Frampton having more ways to win, especially with his ring movement, his slick ability. And I think that if he could drag Scott Quigg into the later rounds, it's going to be to Carl Frampton's advantage.
Yeah, I mean, I largely agree with you. I don't think Quigg can stand and jab it out with Carl Frampton. I think Carl Frampton will win quite comfortably if it turns into a battle of the jab and outside boxing. I think you're spot on. Frampton's got to keep it very disciplined early, stick to his boxing. I expect Frampton could easily be 3 or 4 rounds up at the halfway stage, and I think Quigg is going to have to throw caution to the wind. Now, Quigg is an extremely fit fighter. It's talked about a lot, but he is one of the hardest trainers, the best conditioned guys. Quigg can fight for 12 rounds. He will be pushing the pace even in the final stages of this fight, which again could be key if Frampton really is tight at the weight like people are suggesting. But the key for me is when Scott Quigg realises that he can't jab with Frampton, when he realises he's down on the cards, and when he throws caution to the wind, how is Frampton going to deal with that? And for me, Carl Frampton has to deal with that by moving to a back foot game, keeping the jab constant, keep scoring punches, and using his legs and moving and staying away from standing right in front of Scott Quigg. But if Frampton gets tired, if Frampton, starts to struggle in the 9th, 10th round, etc., and becomes a bit more stationary, he could be in trouble. On balance, I do agree with you. If I had a gun to my head, I'd pick Carl Frampton to win this fight on points. I do just think he's a superior boxing technician, and I think, he's probably going to have enough to get the job done. But it's a fascinating fight. It all depends how it plays out, and it's a great mixture of styles for me.
Absolutely. I love the styles here, man. I really do. And like you said, the thing why I have to just lean towards Carl Frampton in this close fight is because the people who are picking Scott Quigg to win this fight, and fair play to him, obviously Quigg is very live here.
Yeah.
Very, very live. But if this turns into a boxing match, like you said, you have to give the edge to Carl Frampton. So Frampton just has more ways to win. He's more versatile. But like you said, man, Quigg is definitely going to check and see what Carl Frampton's punch resistance is, see what his resistance to those body punches looks like. Because, again, if that is true and Frampton is really, shrinking down really hard and struggling to make this weight, that will play a big part in this fight, where nutrition and body conditioning is going to be huge in this fight, because both of these guys have the will to win this fight. They understand what's at stake here. This is such a huge fight for bragging rights, and obviously to move on to bigger and better things. I think both guys are going to leave it all in the ring. And we're going to see, man. I wish both guys the best of luck, and I'm really looking forward to see what happens in this fight. Do you have anything you want to add before we move on to the next guy, which is Guillermo Rigondeaux?
Yeah, I mean, funnily enough, what I was going to say is, who do you think the winner would go on to fight? But I guess we can kind of cover that in the Rigondeaux conversation.
Yeah, man, I think it's definitely probably going to be Rigondeaux. I think that there's a lot of voices that have been getting louder for that fight to happen. We know Rigondeaux doesn't have a huge fan base, but from what I've heard, he's already coming over there to the UK to participate in some fights. So maybe he's trying to, build the hype for that. And I think Frampton has already said if he wins, that's something that he wants. So we'll have to see. Obviously, this is a really, really good fight. Kind of like how Franz Groves won was, then a rematch could very well be possible. And obviously Eddie Hearn, I'm sure, would love a rematch for Scott Quigg, especially if he loses. That's definitely the direction that Eddie Hearn would want to go in. So a rematch is very possible, but if we're not talking about a rematch, I think Rigondeaux is next. And I do think that Frampton has the best shot out of the two versus Rigondeaux. Even though Quigg does have the power to put Rigondeaux down, I think that Frampton is probably the more versatile. And again, that's something that's going to be very crucial versus a guy like Rigondeaux, who we know is very skilled.
Yeah, I mean, I am not convinced that the winner of this fight will fight Rigondeaux. Actually, I feel that's less likely. I think the rematch is certainly a definite possibility if it's a close fight. But I'm thinking here, like, the winner of this fight is going to be a real star, both in the UK and abroad. Their career is going to be worth a lot of money. They're going to have a huge amount of momentum. And I just wonder if their respective teams will be too anxious to put them in with Rigondeaux. I mean, I would suspect if Frampton wins this fight, he will maybe move up in weight and look at some of the bigger fights in the weight division above. Now, if Scott Quigg were to win the fight, there's another big fight that he could potentially look at with another UK fighter, Jamie McDonnell. Jamie McDonnell obviously has had some real big fights with 2 wins over Kameda. And McDonnell's a bigger guy for his division. There's some scope for him to come up and meet Scott Quigg and for that fight to happen, which would be a very, very big fight in England as well. So I just wonder if those fights would be viewed as safer fights, less risky than Rigondeaux. Rigondeaux is fighting in the UK here. He's fighting a guy called James Jazza Dickens. It's widely regarded that Rigondeaux should be able to get rid of Jazza Dickens without too many problems. So we will see if that builds his profile over here, and I hope it does.
Yeah, and I've actually been saying that Rigondeaux needs to go to the UK for a long time. I've really been calling for that, because I think that he'll be much more appreciated over there. And again, because you guys have more well-known fighters around that weight class and so many guys for him to fight, I think he'll get himself into bigger fights and more interesting fights over there. So we will see, but you bring up a great point. Obviously, the winner of this fight, Quigg versus Frampton, that winner is definitely going to be a superstar. And the question is going to be, are they going to be anxious to risk that versus a guy of this skill level who, unfortunately, at this point in his career, has not brought the name along with that skill level? We will see. We can only imagine, I guess.
Absolutely. And for what it's worth, look, Rigondeaux is a very, very good fighter. At this stage, clearly he would be a favourite to beat both Carl Frampton and Scott Quigg. But if I was one of those fighters and if I was in their teams, I wouldn't necessarily be running scared of him. I don't know how old he is, but he's an older guy. Teams, I wouldn't necessarily be running scared of him. You know, I don't know how old he is, but he's an older guy. He's obviously had a very long amateur career. He's been inactive. The level of opposition he's been going to be fighting is a lower level of opposition, and I see Rigondeaux as very small at the weight. You know, Frampton, Quigg, both guys carry power, and Rigondeaux, he has been hurt in fights before. I mean, clearly he's an extreme technician. He's very solid defensively, but you know, he's getting older. He's been inactive. He's fighting a lower level of opposition. Potentially, it may not be the worst time to catch him. And you'd have to say, I know he's had some big fights in the past with Donaire, but the winner of Quigg Frampton potentially would be the hardest test of Rigondeaux's professional career as well. You know, so it would be interesting if it did happen.
Great points, man. Great points. I agree, absolutely. And we will see, man. But in the meantime, we await Frampton versus Quigg. Going to be a great fight. I'm going with Carl Frampton, man. This guy is such an intense dude, man. I love watching this guy and the way he just stares opponents down, man.
Yeah.
It's like, geez, man, this guy is definitely an exciting fighter. And as is Scott Quigg, as he proved in his last fight. So really looking forward to that one.
Absolutely, yeah. Frampton's an intense guy, you know. I'd probably weigh about 70, 80 pounds more than him, but I'd be very scared of him, definitely. He's got that look in his eyes, doesn't he?
I agree, man. I agree. Let's move on to another fight.